There we go. So the first thing I'll do is show where the meet recordings are being stored, just for everybody's benefit to go back after this. So I hope everyone here is familiar with the Open Data Portal, which Ryan works through with a couple of others. So we've got the home page here. If we go into feature pages up along the top, click on that.
Good old Shimon network, Richard.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got a load of options here. We go to the local authority and community groups, see it live, and it's just all in this section here. So everything LEAP Plus based is going to be put in this area here. So yeah, there's just a little go-to for you if you ever miss a session or you ever have any questions on that. So that's that. I'll pass over to Ryan, who is going to have a quick data question on the platform for you before we dive into it as well.
Yes, thank you, Rich. Hello, everyone. As introduced, I'm Ryan. I'm sure I've probably met quite a few of you over the last 2 or 3 years. I am Northern Power Grid's Open Data Lead, and I'm just quickly going to take up a couple of minutes of this call. Ourselves and Advanced Infrastructure, the team behind the LEAP Plus platform, are looking at bringing our heat map data into the LEAP Plus platform for you guys. So that will give you information on capacity, essentially, on primary BSP, GSP level. The heat maps we publish on the Open Data Portal are, if I'm honest, probably made more with connection developers in mind than local authorities. So the bounds selected are maybe a bit large for a lot of your average projects, and where you have some large scale ones as well. But for your average project, it might be a bit out of scope. So I'm going to launch a quick poll once we have all of you in the room. If you don't know, just don't answer, that's fine. But if you can give an indication as to kind of what level of capacity you would be interested the map going green at. So sort of the average capacity of some of your larger projects. I'm thinking, like a large scale house development, that kind of thing. And what we'll do is we'll take the answer from there and we'll use it to inform the decision we make the base layer appear at. You can change it yourselves anyway in the LEAP Plus tool, but it's just to get an idea of what the baseline comes up when you select it. So I'm going to launch that now. Don't worry about MVA versus megawatt. But for all cases and purposes at this point, they're the same. So if you see a quick answer, I've got 0.5 as our lowest, because below that, you're looking not at primary level. And I've got 5 at our highest, because we probably won't go higher than 5 at primary. So just a gauge of interest if you know the sort of average size of your project, and then we'll take that away and we'll help to sort of scale what we give you guys the information in its sort of baseline view. So I'll just let that run for about 30 seconds, and then we'll hand over to AI for what you've all actually come here to witness, which is the PV deep dive. Looking like 2 MVA is probably going to be the winner, which I think is lower than it is on our heat maps on our portal, so that's about what I probably expected. Give it 10 more seconds, because I can't actually see the number of votes, and then I just see percentages. I like can't see numbers. There we go. Right. Well, looks like 2 MVA is the most popular one there, so I'll share that with Rich and the AI team, and we'll work on getting those headroom data sets into the portal for you guys. So I'll close the poll, hopefully. And with that, there we go. And with that, I'll hand over to Cleo to get today's session really up and running.
Thanks, Ryan. Hi, everybody. I've probably met most of you before in previous sessions, but if not, I'm Cleo. I'm the Customer Success Manager over at Advanced Infrastructure, who are the developers of the LEAP Plus platform. And today's session is going to be kind of taking it back to basics and just starting off slow on how to use LEAP Plus for your site selection. And we're specifically going to be focusing on solar projects today. And so today's session is designed to be mostly helpful for local authorities who are at any stages of planning, because you're going to be doing site selection when you start any new project. but it's especially targeted at anyone who's at the beginning stage of a solar project. And if you are using LEAP Plus and you feel that it might not be relevant to you because you're not creating a LEAP, hopefully you learn a bit in today's session about how you can benefit from this platform, even if your local authority isn't carrying out any sort of really major, large scale, long-term strategic plan. It's useful for any sort of small strategic plans or future projects that you're looking at creating. So I'm going to be doing an overview of how LEAP Plus can benefit you when you're at this stage in your planning. I've got a couple slides to show, and then I'll do a quick demonstration of the different data sets and data analysis tools that you might find useful when you're at that stage, which are available to you in LEAP Plus. So let me just get my screen up on here. Hopefully everybody can see my very basic slides that I've got up. I just thought it'd be helpful to talk through some basic terms and highlight a few things about LEAP Plus before I actually start going and walking through it, because I know everybody here is new to the platform. And on that note, actually, before I start presenting on this, if anyone is on this call but doesn't have access to LEAP Plus, please do pop your email and local authority in the chat, and we can get you invited at some point during or after this session to make sure you can get access to the tool. So just starting off basic here, most of you probably know what site selection is, but just in case you call it something different within your teams, I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page here, that the term that I'm talking about today is the process that you carry out when you first start any kind of decarbonization project. So when you go about choosing the best site, whether that be a building or a bit of land to develop on or to retrofit, that is the sort of phase of planning that I'm talking about today. So that might involve analyzing a range of geospatial data, most of which is hopefully available to you in LEAP Plus. So that might be building potential for your project or looking at potential land constraints where you might not want to develop or where you may want to develop. You'll be looking at things like the environmental or sociodemographic impact of carrying out a project in a certain site or building. And of course, you'll also be looking at whether or not there's capacity on the electricity grid for your plans. So there's a whole bunch of different bits of data and factors that you'll want to consider when you go about choosing a potential site or looking at a few different potential sites for your decarbonization project. So how can using LEAP Plus help you when you're in this phase of your planning? So first of all, LEAP Plus and using LEAP Plus for site selection can help make the process quite a bit quicker and more efficient. So some of the data analysis tools which I'll be showing you today, so specifically our portfolios tool, which I'll be talking through, can be quite helpful to really quickly identify a large number of buildings that meet a specified criteria. So if you know the type of building that you're looking to retrofit and you don't know which buildings within your local authority meet that criteria, portfolios can help you there. Additionally, Northern Power Grid has obviously provided quite a large range of network data, so you can access that alongside all the other LEAP Plus data sets on the platform. So that's helpful because you can really quickly check whether there's capacity on the grid for your plans. If you're looking at planning something like a heat pump project or a EV charging hub, you can easily layer on transport data with network data, and it's quite quick to identify places which are suitable or not suitable, for example, for that kind of project. You can also hopefully reduce total costs by using LEAP Plus for this phase of your planning. So since LEAP Plus is being made free by Northern Power Grid, it's a free tool to use, and getting access to it gives you access to not only free data analysis tools, but also a large range of free data sets, some of which would have had a fee associated with it usually, had it not been available on LEAP Plus. And then you can also use the data and tools in LEAP Plus to build up business cases and funding applications. So you can use that obviously to hopefully obtain additional financial support and then reduce overall costs associated with deploying your project. It also benefits collaboration as well, so it's quite easy to collaborate with your colleagues when you're using LEAP Plus because it is that shared workspace. Hopefully most of you are on LEAP Plus and know that a few of your coworkers are also on the platform. So if you don't know anyone on your team who has access, you can always get them access by reaching out to us, or if you have an admin user at your local authority, they can invite them. And once you're all have an account on LEAP Plus, you can easily share data with each other or potential plans and collaborate on site selection and get feedback from senior members of your team and that kind of thing. You can also invite third parties to LEAP Plus, so consultants, energy groups, community stakeholders, anyone else you can think of who you might want to get feedback from or want to collaborate on when choosing a site for your project. You can invite them to LAEP Plus, or you can make a data story in LAEP Plus, which is a way to engage with stakeholders where you can add in data from the platform and you can put in survey questions alongside it and highlight potential sites for a project. You can share things like the cost of what that project would be, and you can get feedback from stakeholders that way too. So it depends sort of what level you're working with the stakeholder, whether you want to actually invite them into LAEP Plus to work with you or whether you want to just share something with them and generate some feedback. And then lastly, the last sort of benefit for LAEP Plus at this stage is that it's a one-stop shop. So you've got all of your data and analysis tools in there for site selection. And then once you've actually chosen your site, you can start modeling your project on LAEP Plus and dropping assets onto buildings or areas and running analysis on that and sharing that with stakeholders. So we'll be covering those next stages in future sessions. And today we're keeping it very specifically focused on that site selection phase. But yeah, in future sessions, we'll cover building projects and sharing those with stakeholders. So I'm going to walk through some of the key data sets that you might want to use for a PV project, which are already in LAEP Plus in just a second. But before I do that, I wanted to also highlight some additional data that you might have locally at your council, which would be beneficial to upload into LAEP Plus, and you can then use that alongside existing data on the platform. So these are some data sets which are beneficial for you to add if you have them or if they're openly available online, which I know some of them like brownfield sites are, and some car park data sets are available online as well. Not all of these are necessarily relevant to a PV project, but I just wanted to highlight them. So specifically, council-owned buildings or land, that's a big one. If you do have it as a geospatial data set, it's super beneficial for you to upload it into the tool, because then obviously it's going to be easy for you to identify which buildings you might want to start with. A lot of councils choose to start by decarbonizing their own buildings. It's going to be a lot more streamlined and straightforward to decarbonize or retrofit buildings that you own. Additionally, planned development sites or local plan allocations, that's going to be helpful to have those areas highlighted on the map when you start looking at potential new projects in areas where you might want to develop in. Brownfield sites, for the same reason, you'll be able to easily flag areas which might be a good spot for potential new housing estate, for example. Existing renewable technologies or decarbonization projects, so you want to know kind of what you're already working with, what your baseline is. Car park locations if you're looking at a transport project, and then any sites with known existing planning constraints as well. So obviously we have quite a wide range of environmental data in LAEP Plus, but if you know that there's some sites that you can't develop in for sort of any specific reason, it's worth having those on LAEP Plus just to easily highlight those when you're looking at the map and know where you might want to avoid. So if I just navigate over to LAEP Plus here, hopefully you can all see that I've switched tabs. So I'm now going to walk through a few of the relevant data sets for PV site selection in LAEP Plus, as well as the different data analysis tools to go with them. And we're going to be walking through two different use cases. So hopefully we're kind of going through a couple different options to cater to different teams who might be on the call today. So the first one is going to be focused on identifying homes for a domestic rooftop PV project at quite a large scale. So looking at how we could identify a large number of domestic properties that might be suitable for rooftop PV in this imaginary scenario that we're looking at. And then the second use case is going to be sort of a non-domestic project. So looking at local schools, we're in Newcastle on LAEP Plus at the moment. So we're going to be trying to find a specific individual, just one school to pick for a non-domestic rooftop PV deployment project where we're going to be looking at obviously quite a large array of solar to deploy onto a single school. So before I dive into those two use cases, I just want to flag for anybody who's new to LAEP Plus on the call today, just a few resources that you've got on the platform. So when you log into LAEP Plus, in the lower right corner, you'll see this chat icon. And if you click on that, that's where you can access our knowledge base. If you click on this help icon right here, you'll see our full list of guides, and that includes written guides for tools on the platform as well as video walkthroughs. So for example, if we go over to projects here, you'll be able to see a full written guide for projects as well as the video tutorial here. So if you're confused on any sort of tools in the platform, how to use them, what they're for, you can check out the knowledge base. You can also search here. You can also find some bits about some of the data sets in the platform as well. So any of the data that we have added in that's been modeled by our team, you can find the methodology in here. So for example, if you wanted to look at how we've determined whether or not a building is suitable for rooftop PV, if you search that in the knowledge base, you can get to this rooftop PV potential guide where you can see an overview of the data set, our methodology, our sources, our assumptions, that kind of thing. And then lastly, if you have any specific questions and you don't find your answer anywhere in the knowledge base, you're always welcome to reach out to us. If you click on messages here and then click on send us a message, that'll take you directly through to our team and we can help you out with using LEAP+. You can also access some tutorials in the top right of the LEAP+ homepage. So if you click on access tutorials and then start tutorial, you'll get a basic high-level walkthrough of how to use the platform. Or similarly, you can get tutorials for specific features. If you're on the page of that feature and then click on that tutorials button, you'll get a walkthrough of that feature. All right, so I'm just going to dive in now. So the first use case that we're going to walk through is going to be looking at those domestic buildings and trying to find a range of domestic properties where we might want to deploy rooftop PV. So I'm going to start by heading over to the map here. And the first thing you might want to do if you have that data locally is upload your data sets to the platform. So for example, if you have council-owned houses, you might want to upload that in here so you can see which properties are owned by the council. So to do that, you would just click on this upload data button right here. And then you would just drag your file into this box here and it'll then upload. It's pretty quick, but if you've got quite a large data set, especially some of those building level data sets are very large, you might have to wait a few minutes for that to upload. And then once that's done, you'll see it in this local data folder right here. You might want to hit that refresh button if you've got any new data sets uploading, and you'll see that then appear in the list of data sets in local data. It is private to your account when you first upload it, but if you want to share it with others, you can click on that eye icon next to the name of the data set. And then you'll see this share data set with other users option right here. And if you just toggle that on and then save it, your data set will appear on the dashboard of anyone who has access to your local authority's version of LEAP+, so anyone within your council. If it's a sensitive data set that you don't want to share with everybody and you just want to share it with select colleagues, the admin user for your council can do that. And if you need any help, you can reach out to us on live chat and ask about it. So the first data set that I'm going to look at for this use case here is in the sociodemographic folder. So there's a few data sets in here that might be useful for this kind of example. So for example, if you're trying to identify areas where residents are less likely to be able to procure solar panels privately or might need a bit of assistance in the transition to net zero, you might want to look at fuel poverty, or you might also want to look at income estimates to identify areas with higher rates of fuel poverty or lower incomes. And you can see those data sets appear on the map here. And you can always check the legend to understand what the different colors mean. So in this case, we're looking at income estimates, and we can see that the annual income in yellow is the lowest end, and then green is the highest end for this area that we're looking at here. You can also click on polygons to get more information about what's available within that data set. So in this case, you can see the net annual income for that polygon I've clicked on, and a bunch of other metrics that come from this data set here. You may also want to look in the energy demand folder as well. So if you're looking at installing rooftop PV on properties that you know might have higher bills and you're looking to assist those properties in lower income areas or who are experiencing fuel poverty, you'll want to install PV on houses where it'll have the most impact and they're already likely to be struggling with high bills. So if you look at this domestic heat demand data set here, you can see that these buildings are colored in different shades of red and orange. And if you click on the legend, you'll see that we're looking at annual heat demand. So you can see which houses here have a higher overall annual heat demand in kilowatt hours. And again, if you click on a house, you'll see more information such as the UPRN, a bit of information about the building and what we've estimated the annual heat demand to be. This is one of our model data sets, modeled by the data team here at Advanced Infrastructure. And again, if you're curious about how we modeled this data, that's available in the knowledge base as well. On that same vector, if you're looking at retrofitting buildings where it's going to have the most impact, you might also want to consider EPC rating. So if you head over to this renewable potentials folder here and download the domestic insulation potential data set, you can see the EPC ratings of different properties. And again, on the legend here, we can see that the green properties have higher EPC ratings. If you click on the buildings, you'll again get a bit more information about that specific EPC rating and how the building is insulated, again, modeled by our data team. And then lastly, you'll definitely want to understand which buildings are suitable for rooftop PV. So I'm going to go ahead and download this domestic rooftop PV potential data set here, again in that renewable potentials folder. And in this data set, you'll see which buildings we've deemed are most likely to be suitable for rooftop PV. And you can see in the legend that buildings that are yellow have been marked true, so they're likely to be suitable for PV, versus the gray ones are likely not suitable. And if you click on them, you'll also get a bit of information about what the estimated annual generation would be if you were to install solar on that house. So you can then get an understanding, again, of which houses might be more impactful in terms of how much solar they could generate, and what the recommended, or maximum even, not recommended, possible array size would be. So that's based on the viable roof area for that property. So there's quite a few data sets in there that you might consider alongside potentially your own data sets that you've uploaded to the tool when you're looking at deploying on domestic properties for PV. But obviously there's quite a few things that you'd want to consider there. There's a range of different data sets that we looked at, and you want to be able to combine those insights. So the way you could do that is by going into our portfolios tool. So if we go over here to the left side navigation bar, you might have to scroll down if you're on a smaller screen. You'll see this icon here, which will take you to portfolios. So portfolios is that filtering tool I was mentioning earlier that allows you to define a set of criteria that you want to find buildings that represent that within your local authority. And portfolios will generate all of the buildings that meet all of the criteria that you've set within your area. So I've got an example portfolio that I created here for this domestic properties for solar use case. So if I just click on manage and then edit, we'll be able to go in and explore exactly how I created this portfolio. So in this case, I wanted to find all of the properties that were suitable for solar. And I wanted them to have lower EPC ratings because I wanted to identify properties that likely had higher bills already and were struggling with bad insulation already, and help them out with the PV deployment project. And I wanted those properties to be in areas that were a bit more deprived. So I've filtered by the English indices of deprivation data set here and looked at only areas where the index equaled 1. So I know that's the lowest indices of deprivation in England. So I've added a few different types of rules to this portfolio. So the first one was this rooftop PV potential data set. So that was a standard rule, which you can add by clicking on this plus rule button here. And I then chose the rooftop PV potential dataset. So if you click on select datasets, you'll be able to explore the range of datasets that you just saw on the map. Select the one you want to filter by, and then select what you want your criteria to be. So in this case, that would be the overall suitability of the building should be true. So then I know that all the buildings within my portfolio are going to be suitable for PV. I'll just remove that rule because I've got it up here already. And then I added a rule for EPC rating. So I'm going to go ahead and add a rule for domestic insulation potential, and I'll filter by EPC rating is, and I think for this one I did the lowest 3 EPC ratings. So then I know that all of the buildings within my portfolio will be suitable for PV and have those EPC ratings I've selected. And then the last thing I've done here is I've done a geospatial filter to constrain the buildings that I'm filtering out to be within a certain area. So I've added a geospatial rule here, and I've said that I want any of the buildings to intersect with a certain area of a data set. So you could also use this does not intersect option to exclude certain areas. If you're looking at filtering out, for example, if you want to ensure that you're not filtering for any buildings that fall within an area where the substation is constrained, for example, you could say it does not intersect a specific substation. But in this case, we're looking at buildings that fall within a specific area. So we'll have intersects, and then we're going to filter by the indices of deprivation data set here. And we're going to filter by the index of multiple deprivation decile. And we've set that to be equal to 1 because we're just looking at that lowest number there. So that's how I set up these 3 rules here. And I'm then going to go back and look at the results for this portfolio. And it's going to highlight all of the buildings within the Newcastle area that meet that criteria that we've just set. And you can see those highlighted in purple here on the map in this area, There's some in this area over here, and then some, I think I saw some up here as well. So that's obviously quite a lot of properties. If you wanted to narrow down your criteria more, you could take it down to less EPC ratings. So for example, just the bottom EPC rating. You could add additional filters as well for things like fuel poverty or filters for generation potential, heat demand. Any of the different data sets that we just looked at, you could bring into portfolios and use to narrow down your selection of domestic properties. You could also then export this, so you can view it as a table, and you can also export that table so you can get the full list of UPRNs of the properties that meet that criteria that you've set. So I'm going to go back into the map here, and we're going to look at the second use case that I mentioned. So we're looking at a non-domestic example now, where we're going to try and identify a school for a large amount of solar panels. So this example that I'm going to walk through, obviously I'm using schools today, but it's quite relevant for any sort of non-domestic solar project that you're looking at. For example, if you're looking at industrial solar deployment or you're looking at installing on retail, you could use kind of the same methodology there as well. So the first thing we want to do is obviously when we're looking at the map here, it is quite clear where the schools are. You can see them highlighted in these sort of yellow polygons on the map, and we know that those are schools, but it's still going to be difficult to identify specifically the school buildings when we're looking at an area, especially if you're working with a larger local authority area. So we want to be able to filter out just school buildings, which we can do by going into this buildings folder here and then downloading the address-based premium dataset. So this is the ordnance survey dataset, which is quite helpful as it has a whole bunch of information about different details about each building. For example, its purpose. So we'll be able to easily identify buildings where the purpose is education. So you can see in this example here, I've got a school centered on the map. And if I click on the data set that I've just downloaded and scroll down in this pop-up a bit, I'm going to be able to see, it looks like the secondary code for this description for this one is actually leisure. But if we go over maybe to this school here, we've got education there. So, so for most of these, for the schools, the code description will be education. So we'll be able to easily identify different buildings where that code description is classed as education. And we can then also download the rooftop PV data set that we were just looking at, except in this case, we'll be looking at non-domestic rooftop PV to figure out which of these schools that we've highlighted on the map are suitable for PV. So the first thing we're going to do, actually, sorry, before we look at that non-domestic rooftop PV data set, is we're going to filter out only buildings that are considered schools in this OS data set. So once you've downloaded the data set to the map, we're going to head over to the filters tab here. So that's that little filters icon right there. And then we're going to add a filter and we're going to select that address-based premium data set from the drop down here. And then the field we want to filter by is that secondary code description, because we just clicked on a building that we knew was a school, checked out the secondary code description, we saw that that was education. So that was a helpful indication of what we'd want to filter by in this case. So if I just scroll down here and find secondary code description here, I can then select from this drop down here, education. And it's going to filter out all of these buildings within these yellow patches on the map here, which are considered schools within this ordnance survey database. And now that I've been able to easily identify those, then I'd want to go in and have a look at this non-domestic rooftop PV potential dataset available in the renewable potential folder. And I'll just toggle off address-based premium to make that a bit easier to see. And we're able to see which buildings are considered suitable for PV versus which buildings are not. So we can use first this buildings data set to hone in on different school buildings that we might want to consider, like this one. And we can then use the non-domestic rooftop PV potential data set to see whether or not that building would be suitable for rooftop PV. And then important for this example, what the annual generation potential would be, because we want to find a school building basically that has a very high generation potential so that we can create quite an impactful project in this example that we're walking through. And you might do something similar if you're looking at some kind of industrial project or you're looking at deploying onto retail, like I mentioned before. The other thing that you might want to consider when you're looking at this example is not planning a project onto a listed building, because a lot of schools are listed buildings and you're probably going to face complications or just long timelines or sort of creative ways to get around that if you are looking at deploying solar onto those properties. So we do have listed buildings as a data set within the buildings folder here. If I just download that data set to the map, it'll appear as brown dots like this on the map. And if you want to make those a bit bigger, you can go into the layers tab here, click on the data set, and then you can just increase the radius of those so they're a bit easier to spot. And you can see there are some cases where they do fall onto a school, and those are schools that we might want to avoid. You can see some university buildings here listed, and there's quite a big cluster in certain areas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to again use portfolios to identify all of the schools within Newcastle that are suitable for rooftop PV and have a certain generation potential. And we're going to ensure that they're not considered listed buildings as well. So I'm going to head over to portfolios again on that left side navigation bar and click on this example one that I made before. And in this case, I again have 3 sets of criteria in here. So the first one is filtered by that address-based premium dataset. So that was another standard rule here. And I've filtered by the field secondary code description, and I've set that to be education. And you could take this a step further if you're exploring the address-based premium dataset on the map and you find that different schools that you might want to consider are classed as in, like, for example, the tertiary code description, if they're classed as primary schools or secondary schools. You could take this a step further, but it would take a bit more analysis of this data set to kind of understand the different code descriptions and the different levels of those for different buildings. So I've just done a high level education, and I think that'll be suitable for this example here. You could also do this again for retail, leisure, medical buildings, offices, etc. I've then added a filter. This is another building level standard rule here for non-domestic rooftop PV potential. So in this case, I've wanted to find just properties where the annual generation is quite high. And so again, this took a bit of exploring, looking at the non-domestic rooftop PV data set on schools specifically and checking out the field for generation potential and kind of understanding what was standard in my area and sort of what was achievable to set here. And I found that having a minimum of 500,000 kilowatt hours in terms of annual generation was relatively realistic for the school buildings I was looking at. So I've set that filter here. And then lastly, I've set a geospatial filter here to ensure that none of the schools that are considered in my portfolio overlap with those circles that we saw on the map that highlight listed buildings. So I've set that to be the grade is any of those 3 grades for listed buildings. The buildings in my portfolio should not intersect with those buildings. So now if we go back and check out the Solar for Schools results, it'll highlight all of the schools within the area that meet that criteria that I've set. So you can see this school here, this school over here. Down here, it looks like the Center for Life was also considered education, and I know from living here that that's actually more of a museum, so you might take a bit more analysis to double check that you might not want to take those filters a bit more granular and filter down by tertiary code description in the address-based data set. But still, this has really quickly identified a bunch of school buildings that have quite a high generation potential, and it's ruled out a lot of schools that I may have otherwise been looking at, which would have had a much lower generation at an annual rate. And so again, you can look at this data on a table, and you can look at the UPRNs for those buildings, and you can also export this out of the tool as a CSV file. I'm just going to go back to the home page now, but that was pretty much everything I wanted to cover. I suppose there was one more thing, actually. If we go back into portfolios, since we have a bit of extra time, in that portfolio that we just created, looking at Solar for Schools, you'll be able to identify easily the schools that you've looked at filtering down, but you might want to find out other information about the area surrounding that school, or, for example, which substations are serving that school. Maybe a bit more relevant if you're looking at a large demand project, for example, because I know we don't have generation headroom in the tool yet. We are looking at adding it, though. But if you wanted to find out something like which substations were serving those schools, you could actually add that into your portfolio. So if I go back into edit mode for that portfolio, you'll see this add additional data button in the top right. So this is quite helpful if there's an insight from one of the data sets in the platform that you want to be able to visualize in your portfolio, like the substation that serves a certain school, but you don't want to filter by that because you're not looking to narrow down the results at all. So for example, if we wanted to know which secondary substation served a school, we might want to filter by secondary substation supply areas. And we'll look at the substation name in this case. So if we now save that and then update our portfolio, it might take a second to load here. Some of you might have seen this trick before in past training sessions as well. But once we've updated our portfolio and then go look at the table results for it, we'll be able to see the names of the substations alongside each of the schools within the table. So I'm going to go back over to table view up here. And you can see all of the schools listed within this portfolio, and you can actually see the second substation name alongside the UPRNs of each of those schools. So you can see the name of the secondary substation that serves that school and next to the annual generation potential for that building. So there's a few different use cases for that one. You might want to look at that if you're planning a demand project or if you're looking at figuring out which substations serve different industrial areas. You can use that little hack to identify easily which substation is serving a different area. But you can add those insights in for any data set. It doesn't have to be specifically for substations. If you just want to know other information, like for example, I think address is available within the address-based premium data set. So if you wanted to know the actual address of each of these schools in this column here, you could add that as an additional data column to appear within that table. Oops, and I've just clicked on a school, so it's taken me there on the map. Right, okay, so that was everything that I had planned for the session today. So we have just under 10 minutes, I think, left. So if anyone's got questions, feel free to raise your hands, and I'll also just open up the chat to see if we've got any.
We've got one in the chat straight away, Cleo. Can councils give permission to stakeholders to access their uploaded data? If so, how do they do that?
That's a good question. So yes, there's a couple different ways you could share an uploaded data set with stakeholders. So the first way would be if you had invited those stakeholders to LEAP Plus and you wanted to sort of work together with them and give them access to the platform, you can certainly do that. If you have an admin at your local authority, or if you are an admin, you can go into this manage access panel right here, which I won't show because it would reveal user emails. But if you go in there, there is an option to manage user permissions. And if you go to that tab on the panel, you could then change which data sets a user has access to, or you can select a user uploaded data set and share it with specific individuals. So you could share that with stakeholders. And the admin for your tool can invite those stakeholders to LEAP Plus. If you don't have an admin, you can reach out to us on live chat, or you can reach out to Rich over email, and we can get that set up for you so that you can give stakeholders access to this LEAP Plus platform. If those are stakeholders that you actually don't want to invite to this planning platform, but you just want to share insights with, the best way to do that would be with a data story. So I'm just going to open up this example one I have from a past training session. If we go into edit mode, data stories are sort of a way to share a narrative with stakeholders, and these can be shared publicly. You can get a shareable URL if you click this publish button in the top right, which can then go in a newsletter or a website or directly to stakeholders via email. And they can then view this a bit like a PowerPoint, but it's shared to essentially a website that they can then click through the slides on and give feedback on different pages. And you can share user uploaded data sets in this way. So if you add a map to a page of a data story, this essentially looks a bit like the Data Explorer, and you can just select any of the data sets that you see within the Data Explorer to add to a page of the data story. And if you scroll to the bottom, your local data will be available to add to a data story page. So you could share a snapshot of the data with stakeholders in this way, and they'd be able to view the data in an interactive view on the map, but they wouldn't have access to the raw data. They wouldn't be able to export it or anything like that. So it kind of depends at what level you're looking to engage with the stakeholder and kind of how much information you want to give them. But yeah, essentially you can either invite them to LEAP Plus and share the data set directly with them on the platform, or you can share it in a more presentation style format, which is only accessible via a private URL, and they won't be able to get the raw data. Just moving on to the next question in the chat there, is there a data set for commercial properties? Yes. So if you're referring to something like address-based premium, like we're looking at domestic properties in schools with, you can filter that for commercial buildings as well. So if you download the data set, and I have to remove the filter that I set, you'll see that it does propagate for all buildings. If I try to find a commercial center here, well, we've got a shop here, which you can see is included in the data set. And so you can click on different buildings. Looks like those don't have data, but here we can see that this is described as a shop here in the class description, and just described as retail in the secondary code description. So there are a few different ways you can determine which buildings are commercial and exactly what they're used for. And then for our renewable potential data sets, we have them all for non-domestic buildings. So for example, non-domestic air source heat pump potential, non-domestic rooftop PV potential, which we use today. Everything in here should apply to both domestic and non-domestic buildings. Could you clarify which factors are being taken into account when estimating annual generation for each building? Yes, so in the knowledge base, I think there should be information on that. I actually don't know. I'm certainly not a data engineer myself, but in the knowledge base, we do have articles within the dataset assumption section and rooftop PV. There should be information on how we determined annual generation. Yes, so that was, we looked at peak electricity capacity. And then we do have our sources and assumptions listed here. But if you do have more questions specifically about this methodology, I'd recommend reaching out on live chat, because then I could take that question directly back to our data team. And we can get back to you and give you a bit more information or connect you directly with them if they've got complicated information to share directly with you. Looking at the last question in the chat here, can we search area using lat long instead of postcode? So I think you're referring to on the map here, if you are zoomed out a bit, we have this search location button up in the top menu bar here, which some people may not have looked at yet. This allows you to identify a certain area within Newcastle or within your local authority by postcode rather than by sort of just zooming in and searching around for specific buildings. So we don't have the ability to search by any other sort of identifier for a building. So at the moment it is just postcode here. I believe we do have a feature request, which is we've already got logged, and we are working on bringing to LAEP Plus in the future to search by address, because we can certainly see why someone might not know the postcode of a specific building or want to find a specific building within a postcode. I actually don't think we have heard searching by lat long before, but I can definitely bring it back to the team. So it's not something we have plans to add, but once it's been requested by one of you, I can definitely bring it back to the product team and see if it's something we could develop in the future, for sure. But yeah, unfortunately right now there wouldn't be a way to do that. I think I got through all the questions in the chat, but do shout if I've skipped yours. And I can see there were some access requests as well, so I will make sure that I copy down this chat and get everyone invites sent out probably before the end of the day.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Cleo. That was excellent as always. Just a quick bit of housekeeping that we do have our next drop-in session on Monday next week at 11 a.m. There's the meeting invite just dropped into chat again if you don't already have it. That's your chance just to bring along anything you've been working on, anything you'd like to discuss at all, or if you'd just like to sit in, have a quick discussion, sit in, listen, see what other people are working on, that's absolutely fine. Cleo, I'll let you pick up that question from Ange that's just come in.
Yes, I was just going to type out a response, but I was just going to say if you could drop your email into the chat, please. I'm not sure why you're getting an error when you try to log in, but it sounds like it might be a bug on our end. So if you could drop your email in, I can bring that back to our engineers and see if there's any sort of issues they need to flag with your account.
That's brilliant. Thank you. If there's no more questions. No, I think that's all right. I think we'll call it there. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good rest of the day.
I can see there is a hand raised. I don't know if it's intentional, but I'm sticking around anyways to get the chat down. So if anyone's got any last minute questions.
I think that maybe was supposed to be like the applause emoji.
I think possibly that, yeah, I think that was probably